I got an alternate storyline, and it's about Rukia. Rukia being the MC. So she's now our MC in Bleach. So what happens is she does go to the world of the living. She's there on orders from Aizen to investigate a hollow that is, gone to the world of the living. Now, Aizen's given her that, mission on the side. Like, Rukia had other orders to do other things. Her brother even said, "Don't go to the world of the living. You're never supposed to do that. You're supposed to stay in Squad 13 and do whatever he has you tasked with." But then, she got the go ahead from Aizen. Aizen was like, "I can only trust you with this," and he also it leads to shit later. All right, so basically, she goes there and she's fighting. Ichigo is still a character, and he still gets powers from Rukia. Rukia gets injured, and she gets half of her powers taken from her. But from what it looks like, it's like all of her powers are taken away. Boom. Ichigo gets his Soul Reaper powers. And he's fighting against this hollow. You know, he beats it, right? She then helps him become a Soul Reaper, you know, on the side. She's like, "You're gonna have to do my job for me." Running around, they meet Chad and Udu and all them. And she's going to school and it's cool, and they're all like, "Yeah." And Ichigo's, challenging Uryu to, just like in the regular store, right? But then it's like this. When Ichigo meets Grand Fisher, something happens with Rukia. She starts to show signs of, holification. But it's not how you think. It's just like a mask appeared on her face, like, and it's kind of like wedged on there. She can't just take it off. And they're like, "What's going on?" She's like, "What's going on?" And Kisuke's like, "Oh shit," because he already knows what it is. But they were already on her ass now. The Soul Society. They come there and they're like, "Oh, not only have you given your powers to a fucking, human, but you also are a hollow. Yeah, you're not my sister anymore." That shit goes the same, right? She gets taken away, and she still like has control of herself. It's just one of those things where the physical um, um appearance of like the hollow mask, it shows up, but like the powers haven't actually taken effect yet, and it's because of who she is, and she wasn't, one of Aizen's, first run, and he's kind of like on this side, still tricking everybody. So Ichigo goes to the Soul Society, and he tries to, fight people. He's running through people just like he did in the other anime, or in the anime, in the original story, right? He's running through Drobo. He's running through, um, Ikaku and Renji. Renji was with them to pick up Rukia, and he was like, "That thing ain't Rukia. That's fucking." He's starting to say, he's like, "That's not Rukia. That's a hollow." You know, that's not the that's not the shawty I fell in love with. You know, and Ichigo's like, "No, without Rukia, I would never, been able to save my family. You out of your mind. I'll fucking kill you, boy." And he's like, he cut him down, right? Rukia escapes from the jail cell, right? So this is how she does it. The powers finally unlock. Boom. You know, they're like, "We're gonna transfer you today," and they're kind of treating her like shit. And she's like, "I don't really want to die. Can somebody save me? Save me!" Boom! She becomes a hollow, right there on the spot, and she fucks all those people up. And they're like, the alarms go off and they're like, there's a hollow in the, and they're like, a hollow, you know, they're looking and they're like, we can't, do this and that. Yoroichi gets to her, right? Now, with Ichigo, he does fight against Kenpachi, and when he fights against Kenpachi, oh my god, their fight gets disturbed, right? So Ichigo gets caught by Byakuya, alright? So he jumps in to help, Kenpachi, because Kenpachi and him were having a great fight, but then Byakuya steps forward. And it's like, you're helping or you're fighting a Ryoka, but you're struggling with it. And he's like, I was about to finish this shit, and you got in my way. You know, they almost had a fight then and there, but the other captain showed up too, and they're like, why are we fighting when we need to find, Rukia? She was sentenced to be executed. And what they decided to do was, okay, since this human wants to, vouch for Rukia Hollow, he doesn't want to go back. He's fighting us. We'll draw her out by executing him. So they have Ichigo on the chopping block now, and he's the one being held up like that. And she learns, oh my god, she learns. So basically, this is what happens. She goes back to the world of the living for a little bit. She learns how to control her Shikai better, and she has holification now because she's trained with, guess who? Shinji. Shinji's getting introduced early now because Yoruichi took um her back to the Senkamo, all that, and she was like, I cannot wait. They actually trained in the Dangai. They trained there for a little bit because you know how the Dangai is like, um, time moves differently there. So basically, she still had time. She got to fight against her brother. Now, when she fought against Byakuya, she was really fucking, working him at first, and she was like, working him, basically forcing him to use his bankai, because she was fast and other things. You know, once the bankai came on, though, it was a bit hard for her. She basically turned into a full hollow, and when she became a full hollow, she became like a monster. She was like, and she like really fucked Byakuya up, right? You know, she got control before like almost killing him, before like actually ripping his head off. She like got control of herself, and she was like, brother, if you want to kill me, then kill me, but let Ichigo go. You don't need to kill him. I understand what I did was wrong, but you gotta let that boy go. And he was like, he didn't know what to say. He just left because his sword was, broken still. And he was just like, and in the midst of all this, Aizen shows up and he's like, it seems that this one has bore fruit, this one being Rukia, being a hollified human being. He got to see, because he was actually watching the fight a little bit, and he was like, all right, she's doing that, but, I think I'm done with this shit. Let me actually go fuck with some hollows. So then he goes to Wake Mundo, and then they're like, okay, Rukia, since we don't know what to do with you, you will operate in the world of the living, and you will watch over Ichigo Kurosaki. That's her like designated job for now. And like she goes back, and they're like, yeah, they have Renji there as a guy to like watch over her, make sure she doesn't like cause problems. Because if she does, you gotta kill her. You gotta chop her head off if she, turns into a hollow again, and causes problems to the human. And he's like, all right, yeah, I accept this and other things, right? So they're running through, and then the spotter show up in Green Drow, and he's like, I'm looking for the one called Rukia. She's the one who has the powers and shit. And he's like, ooh, there's another guy, and he's fighting against Ichigo, and she's like, no. And then Renji's like, you can't fight. If you fight, you'll go out of control. So everybody's fighting their opponents and shit, right? So Ichigo's fighting against um this guy, right? And he becomes a hollow. And he becomes a hollow because he's interacted with Rukia a lot since she's obtained those powers too. You know, Ichigo's still the same kind of Ichigo, but he doesn't have Bankai. So he's running around trying to hit Grimmjow, and Grimmjow's still beating his ass, right? So Rukia steps forward. She has a controlled hollow mask, right? And she's trying to fight him, and then, her mask breaks, and he just, like, bodies both of them. And before, he kills them, Tosin shows up, they go back. So now she's getting trained by, Shinji, but it's actually Ichigo getting trained by Shinji. And he obtains Bankai actually training with them, and because they believe if Ichigo achieves Bankai, he can better control his hollow. And then she's asking, why can't I have Bankai? And they're like, you're not really like that great at using, you know, I don't think it would serve you that much. I don't think you want that. You know, we're focused on Ichigo right now. He has to have his powers under control. He's a human. He's a substitute, but he can't be in this world acting the ass like that. It's just we have to put that under control. And the best way they thought to do that was to have him learn Bankai and then also have him master his, Hollow Mask. So then they did that. Orihime got taken away. So during the training, he did obtain the, Bankai and the holification, you know, but it wasn't refined. So he was like, we have to go save, Orihime. They go. And this time they go, oh shit. Um, this is where she gets interesting. So she chops down, number 9, and she makes easy work of him. Now, number 7 is still kind of tough. She's in a mid to high diff fight against this guy. She got her arm fucked with and stuff. But then, like, she used her hollow mask, and she was really working his ass. And eventually was able to take him out. Byakuya got to the scene. Um, he then had to fight against Noitora. Right? Kenpachi's fighting against, number 3, because she was there, right? Before she went to the other place, Kenpachi was fighting with, Tear Hollybell, right? And he was fighting against her. She was getting worked, but she also wasn't going all out. He also wasn't going all out, but they were like fighting, on some other shit, right? Boom, boom, boom. And they were like, there's 2 like high Reatsu levels coming from that side, and Mayuri packed up number 8. You know, Byakuya ended up fighting against, um, Ukiura, and basically he almost dies, but then Ichigo shows up. He's like all fucked up and shit, and then Ichigo shows up like, boom, I'll take over this fight. And he's fighting him, right? So then Rukia took care of number 7, and she was like, this is crazy. She goes into Dangai, Precipice World. They're like, because when Aizen did this shit, he had no Zanpakuto on her. So this is how the story makes sense. When he gave her the powers of Mahalo, he basically gave her a handshake, and on his hand was like the residuals and prerequisites for a hollow parasite on his side. He wasn't really like in attire and shit, right? He wasn't like carrying his sword around and shit, right? So she's never seen his Shikai. She's kind of like lost in the clouds and shit. So like when the day they showed or he showed them his Shikai or his Bankai, or not his Bankai but his Shikai, she wasn't there. She was present. So they were like, it actually worked in our favor because you and Ichigo, but Ichigo is fighting somebody at the moment, and that man is pretty powerful. You know, he might not even make it. And she's like, nah, Ichigo got that. She wasn't worried because they're friends and they have a close connection now. So she was like, yeah. She then went and she fought against, Aizen, right? In the world of living. Everybody, Tear Holly Bell had a new opponent. She had, um, let's say this, each guy had an easier time beating her. And like she was at basically 85% health bar. So it was basically like neck and neck. Still kind of the same way as it was before, but she was like, it was noticeable that she lost that fight this time. Um, she or Karaku and Ukitake fought against no one. All that shit played out the same way. Now when Rukia showed up, everybody was already cracked out and other things. She's like, hey, why the fuck are you guys attacking each other? We gotta do this, do that, And then when what's his name came up, who fought against fucking Genichimaru? It was Shinji Hiraku. He was still standing and shit. He was like, Rukia, you were a great student and other things, girl, but we really need you out fighting Aizen. And the head captain was like, no, how dare you suggest such things? She can't handle a monster like him. I'll step forward. And he stepped forward to use his shit, right? The Wonder Weiss is there and it still plays out the same way. He was about to summon his Bankai too. He was like done. He was like, you think I'll burn this whole fucking like realm to ash, you know? But before he could do that shit, Wonder Weiss was there. Boom, pack that shit in, right? So then he was like, no problem, I have all my other, techniques. He still forgot that, his power was stored. So he was like, oh shit, boom. And that played out very similarly. Aizen was cornered by, Ishin and, Ukitake, or not Ukitake, goddammit, Kisuke, and Yoruichi. They're fighting. Boom, 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 boom. They're, doing their thing. And, Genichi Maru was almost put down by Shinji, but then Shinji got, cut down. And she was like, no, Shinji. And she tries to go help him. And, she's cautioning. And he's like, a little Soul Reaper girl like you shouldn't be fighting to save this, world. You might as well accept Aizen and other things, you can't beat him. They shouldn't fucking, put all their fucking trust in, a fucking mere woman like saying shit like that, right? Kind of how he was talking down to Ichigo, but now he's doing it to Rukia. Now Rukia, Ishin was like, you kind of like my boy Ichigo, don't you? You know, you got to save us, Rukia. I know we haven't met, we haven't, had, much conversation, but my boy's not here. You need to learn Bankai. She's like, what? He's like, how are you? My Bankai, it's not just any Bankai. You're basically gonna have to create a move that, once you use it, you won't be able to Soul Reaper anymore, and you'll have to live in the world of the living. Give up all that. Give up your, dream of being a Soul Reaper captain to save the world. She's like, yes, and she did her thing like Ichigo, and she fought against her Zanpakuto, and she was given like tremendous power, right? She fought against Aizen, Boom, she fought against Aizen, you know. And this is the thing, she's a little bit weaker than Ichigo was. So this is what happened during this fight. In the mid fight, Ichigo arrives, and he's actually, not as powerful as he used to be, but he's still pretty strong. Boom, it throws him off a little bit, and he's like, "How did he come?" And he's like, "The Garganta was opened by none other than what's his name? Um, by um, by Ori, right?" So boom, he's there, and he's fighting a little bit, but he gets dismissed, right? And then he's like, "Do that shit, Rukia." And Rukia hits that shit off, right? Boom, it hits him. And then Rukia's like, he's like, "Are you all right?" And he's like, "That should have done it." And she starts to, lose her soul powers, and she's like, "Damn, I can't fucking. And she almost like, she was like almost out, and he's like, Ichigo's like, "Damn, Rukia," and then, Aizen starts to recover, but then, Kisuke's like, "Oop, no, 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 that attack was lodged in by, the efforts of Rukia and Ichigo. Now your powers are no more. So now they were in a bind after the Aizen incident. They're like, Rukia, she shouldn't even be on trial or anything for being a hollow. She don't even have story powers anymore. She gave that life up. Now, Ichigo is now instated as her replacement. It's crazy, He's like, "I have to take on my friend's position. She did that to save our worlds. I can at least do this. Until she can figure out a way to do whatever, I'll be a squad 13 member." And she's like, "You don't have to do that." And he's like, "Yeah." And so for the next year and a half, Ichigo was in the Soul Society doing Soul Reaper work. And then Rukia was back in, the world of living, just, living normal life, trying to figure out how she was going to do shit. Kuga Genjo shows up and all that shit. So basically, come through. Everything basically plays out the same way, except we're putting Rukia in the place of Ichigo. So Rukia in the place of Ichigo, she's like, because like Genjo's like, "We need to draw out Ichigo Kurosaki because see, Kuga Genjo knows about Ichigo and understands that Ichigo is a he's still a half breed, or not a half breed, but he's basically everything. You know, I want to feed him this, energy. I want to make him a full bringer. He should have the prerequisites to be a full bringer. He comes there and he fights against Kugo Genjo. Kugo Genjo tries to steal his solar powers. He doesn't. He fights him. She fights him. Ichigo never got a full bring, but he had the ability to. He had the potential to. She and Ichigo ended up fighting this guy. She had to, pack him up because she finally got her sword powers back. Boom. She cut him down. She has Bankai now. Going into Thousand Year Blood War, Ichigo's approached. They try to take his Bankai. It doesn't work. Rukia is now, getting back her, status. Ichigo's running back. Like, he ran back home, and then Ibram showed up, and he's like, "Why the fuck you at my house? I come back after, this long, and you're fucking around in my room." You gotta get the fuck out of here. And he's like, "Yeah." And he tries to take his shit, and it doesn't work. His Bankai. So now she is over in, the world living, and boom, the all that shit comes down. The Sturmers attack, and she's like, "Whoa, I'm just getting my," and they're like, "Well, we gotta go. Like the squad one barracks is already gone." Like they're like, "Shit," you know. Then another fucking minute later, and the head captain's already using his Bankai. She's like, "I can't even use my Zanpakuto," And Byaku's like, don't worry about it, we'll figure it out. And he fights against um uh Asnod, right? All of that goes down the same way. She tries to offer support, but she feels very hopeless. And she tries to go after, she's crazy, right? She tries to go after you, because of all the shit that um, caused the Soul Society. You know, you attack, these, Soul Reapers, my friends, my, family members. You're gonna pay for this. And Renji's like, don't do it, and she's like, she's doing like her thing for a little bit, but he's not going. We know he's not going all out, and he knocks her out. Ichigo gets there and he's actually fighting him for real, like boom, 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 and he's like, "Well, find out that you're my son." And he's like, "What?" Uryu still turns to their side and all that shit. So then they fight, or they go to the royal palace, and she's like, you and Ichigo are the closest things to a being who has, almost all the powers, full brain powers, all this, but it's gonna come down to, you two helping to bring down Yuha, you know. But we could probably kill him before that, right? If he decides to come here, we can kill him, as Squad Zero. And they're like, yeah, but we have to go down there and help the Soul Reapers out because they're down there doing that shit. So she goes down there and she handles as not with ease this time because she got the Squad Zero training too. Her Bankai was refined, so now she could use it to a great degree. Boom! She froze him as soon as she got there. And she was in Bankai form and everything. And they were like, damn, she took care of him with ease. She's out around fighting everybody else. Ichi goes around, fighting against the Bambis. He's like, I could really fuck you girls up. And then he, almost killed one of them. Everybody else fought against who they fought against. Kapachi fought against, Grammy, Komamura turned into a wolf. All that shit happened the same way. Now it gets, to the part where they try to stop Yua, and he's forcing Ichigo to cut the Soul King. Then, what's his name? God damn it. Ukitake, Mimihagi, boom, fixes it, stabilizes it for a little bit. Not completely fixes it, but, stabilizes Soul King. And then we enter into the final phase, basically. You know, Askin is fighting against he's fighting against Mayuri. Alright. Pernida is fighting against Kisuke Udahara. Alright. I'm changing these fights up a little bit. Gerard Valkyrie's fighting against the head captain, Shunsui Kuraku is fighting against him by himself. Alright, and everybody else is fighting against Lilibaro. Everybody like, Kenpachi, Itsugaya, Byakuya, you know, um, basically anybody else who's, on standby, like Shinji and anybody else, they're all fighting against him. And then Gerard is like, they had to come back him up after some time because he was getting, like, Gerard was getting fucked up by, you know, Katen Kiyokochu Karamatsu Shinji. But he's powerful, right? He's the heart of the Soul King, or rumored to be. So he got back up again. And they were like, damn. So after being tired from fighting Lily Barrow, they all had to go fight, in Rukia. And Renji was like, we'll handle that guy. You guys gotta go up there and handle that shit, right? you know, and then Rukia and Ichigo are like, Uryu's fighting against Juga. And they're like, wow, you're fucking playing games with us or something, Uryu. And he's like, yeah, well, we need to, handle this shit. They go in there, and then, you all was like, I can see all futures, even though there's two of you, and it was destined for you to try to beat me. I'm already there. I'm already like control of everything. I see it all, right? Boom, 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 and they're fighting, and Ichigo, uses his Bankai, and Rukia is using her Bankai. But the whole time they weren't even fighting Yuha. He was somewhere else. He's fighting at Sosuke Aizen now. Boom. And they're fighting, right? And they go down there to, see what the fuck's going on, right? After, fighting the fake Yuha. But that took a lot out of them too. Not gonna lie. They were fighting the fake Yuha and it took a lot out of them. So then they needed, recoup back people, or showed up and other things, right? And then, a certain arrow was given to Udi from just randomly, right? You know, a silver arrow was given to him, and he's like, "You have to use this shit to kill him." It was your birthright. So like Ichigo and Ruki are like working him with Aizen. Aizen's there, backing them up a little bit, but he's still trained to a chair, so he's like not fully active. He's only about like 40%, 50%. And in the midst of all of it, he's like, I'm gonna kill all of you. And then that arrow just comes and and then they use a combined attack, and they, take him out. Boom. And then at the end of it, Ichigo's like, hey, we've helped each other out and shit. Hey, girl, if you ever need our help again, I'm over here in the world of living. It's cool. Renji and her get together or whatever. But, she becomes Squad 13 captain. They're like, after all you've done and other things, girl, you are now the Squad 13 captain. And from the beginning of this, like, story, she's always wanted to be a Storybook captain. She thinks back to her childhood and everything. She's like, I finally did it. And Byakuya cracks a slight smile and he's like, well, at least you did what you wanted, And then they all lived, whatever, happily ever after and shit, right? So she was the main character. I think it would have been cool if Rukia was the main character, if he decided to go down that, path, Taitakubo, that is. But I like Ichigo. Rukia, she's not my most favorite character. But I just, told you a story that could have been, possibly could have been, right? Probably not like I said it, but certain things could, be, it could have been true, had it been this way. But I have other stories to tell. I'll tell some more alternate stories. Um, but that was the story of Rukia being the MC. I was told by Darius the Green Angel, be cool, call on the corner, and let me know what you think about this.